Hello students, this is Dr. Johnson and welcome to Legal Issues in Nursing and Healthcare. Again, it's kind of like a mini law lecture. And it's exciting. It's a way to protect yourself as you start practicing. So we're going to look at differentiate the three major categories of law and in which nursing practice is established and governed. We're going to analyze the relationship between accountability and liability, look at some of the essential elements that are proven to establish a claim of negligence and malpractice. And we're going to distinguish between intentional and unintentional torts in nursing. We're going to identify causes of nursing errors and patient injuries that have led to claims of criminal negligence. And we're going to incorporate the fundamental laws and statutory regulations that establishes the patient's right to autonomy, self-determination, informed consent, and informed decision-making. And of course, incorporate the laws and statutory regulations that establishes a patient's right to privacy and privacy of health records. So this is kind of a brush up on all the things you've learned in nursing about legal and ethics. We're going to have an ethics lecture too. So very important lecture. So please listen. Don't overwhelm yourself, just listen. So again, I'll start with the key terms. I'm not going to go through it, but it's very important that you get to know them. Very important. It's a way to actually get yourself ready as you listen to the lecture and of course, read your textbook. So be aware of the key terms. And it's a lot for this. Okay, so where are the sources of law? What affects nursing practice? Where are the laws that affect nursing practice? Where do they come from? So you have statutory laws. These laws, when it's violated, can lead to criminal offenses, and they are laws of the land. It's given. There's no either. You can't say, well, I didn't know. So it's a stable law. So for instance, the EMTALA law, we'll talk about EMTALA law. Violation of this, there's no defense kind of. It's punishable by fines and imprisonment. And of course, you need to know about some of these laws as you're practicing. Then you have the federal statutes that are related to nursing. Many of them, we talked about it when we were talking about the policies and politics, but for some of them, it's coming from the federal government in the sense of what are some of the things we can and cannot do. So for instance, with Medicaid and Medicare, you have the conditions of participation that hospitals must have to be able to participate as part of Medicaid and Medicare entity. Or else they won't get paid, right? Then you have the EMTALA law. EMTALA law is more of that. If somebody comes into emergency room or like triage for OB or emergency room, they must be treated. You can't kick them out. There's something called the anti-dumping law, where and this was enacted in 1980s, 86, and you can't refuse care for somebody because either they're insured or uninsured, or they're poor or they swell. You have to treat them, at least stabilize them before you let them go. So it's applicable to people coming to non-ED settings like urgent care too. You can also apply there. Then you have the American Disability Act. American Disability Act is also a federal law that can discriminate against people that are disabled. You have the Patient Self-Determination Act of 1980 and the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1990, that patients have a right to participate in their own healthcare decisions. They can refuse or accept the medical treatment, and they can have advanced directives. Then you have the HIPAA. I'm not going to explain HIPAA to you guys. You should know this off head right now, right? That patients have a right to carry the insurance from if they lose their job and all that. But the main part of it, where it comes, is that we have to make sure that we don't disclose patient information that may end up harming them. or any identifiable information. So you have all these federal laws and statutes. I think I talked about emergency, American Disability Act, okay, patient safety, and Quality Improvement Act. So with the state statutes, it's more of state. So each state has their own statutes. For instance, you have New York State Nurse Practice Act and the Board of Nursing rules that govern our practice, what we can do, what we cannot do. Now, if I go to practice in Texas, I have to abide by Texas law. We learned this during our delegation class, right? That it differs. Every state has its own law of what a nurse can do and what a nurse cannot do, and what an LPN, for instance, can do in Ohio. An LPN cannot do that in New York, right? So you have different things that governs each state. And then if you violate this, you may end up losing your license, especially if somebody complains about you. So let's say your employer or patient or even family member complain and it goes to state board, they will first of all review it, notify you, and then you're summoned to defend yourself. And you can call witnesses, and and then they will either let you go and say nothing is out of it, or they can find you guilty. If they find you guilty, they can reprimand you, or they can suspend your license, or fine you, or put you on suspension, or not renew your license and take it away altogether. So if you are ever called to court, even if you don't learn anything from me, please don't go at it alone. You need a lawyer. If you can't find one, find me. I'll find you one. Never go alone to front of state board. It's kind of going to court. So don't say, oh, it's just state board. No, they don't have your back. They have the back of the patient. So make sure that you go with a lawyer. If you can't afford a lawyer, afford one, borrow money and go. So if they insist that their decision that they can't change it, then you can actually challenge them and go to court, and the court can either uphold their decision, meaning the court will go with them, or the court can say no, that they're overreaching, meaning that what their decision is not what it's supposed to be. Okay, let's see. So one of the things with the statutory law is the patient staffing. If you remember when we did staffing, that California is the first that has a law that mandates that you should have a minimum set of nurses for patient ratio. Other states don't have this. Working on it, I'm sure other states are working judiciously on it, but so far it's only California that has that. Okay. Other things that you might see that states might also have would be like Child Abuse Prevention Act, infection control, licensing laws, all of those things. Again, it depends on each state. So for instance, in New York State with the child abuse, all of us are mandated. Even if you make a mistake, you're not penalized because we're mandated reporters. For our licensing, sometimes they may make you do extra, like infection control. There are things that you must meet to be able to renew your license. Part of it is actually behavior. You can't go out there and become a prostitute or kill people and expect to get your license. The state board will revoke it because they believe that New York State nurses, that we should have some type of professional behavior that guides us. So any little thing they might use it. And remember what I said, no matter what it is, please go with a lawyer. Don't go at it alone. Okay, so if you look at this question, a nurse checking orders in the front of the desk when a visitor asks the room of his father. The nurse leaves the chat open while looking up the room number on the computer, allowing the visitor to read the patient's recent X-ray film reports. Which law will protect this client from others having access to his or her medical information. So we already know it's HIPAA, right? The Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act. So be careful. Many nurses have fallen victim to this out of the goodness of their hearts. You know, they think that they're doing the right thing. So it can go from fine to imprisonment. So be careful. So the answer is 1. American Nurses Association, we mentioned them when we did the politics. They set the standard for professional performance, and usually it's attached to standard of quality practice to guide nurses. When you have time, please take a look. Some of the things you're learning in trends, and of course in nursing school, we're actually touching on some of these things, but the onus is on you as a practitioner to know what you're supposed and not supposed to do, because this is what they will use against you in court. Okay, so the case laws, not the laws are created, you know, through cases. Like common law are created through cases that were heard from before. So, if, for instance, if you go to court, the lawyer is going to use other cases to qualify what he or she is arguing about. So it's like opinions or other cases that other nurses have done in the past and has been ruled on. That's what they will use to determine common law and case law. So it gives them guidance or guidelines for determining future cases. So for us, you know, we fall in the civil law, you have negligence and malpractice. So the definition of negligence is the failure to act in a reasonable and prudent way. Prudent is like, you know, wise way of doing things. So this is usually what is claimed against nurses, right? Based on the principle that everyone is expected to conduct themselves in a reasonable and wise, prudent way. So like student nurses or regular people, or even nurses themselves, that we're supposed to conduct ourselves in a way that is prudent. So, and another way is that we must be careful in how we take care of what we do. And the malpractice is like negligence. It's a part of negligence, but it's the failure of somebody to do what they're supposed to do according to their training, right? They know they're supposed to do it and it's their training, but they did not do it. So it's a special type of negligence. It's not the same as negligence, but it's part of it. Because the person didn't act the way they're supposed to act. And it's usually, evidence is usually brought by somebody that will come and another RN that will be like, no, I wouldn't do it. If it's me, I will do it the other way. So expert witnesses are usually used for malpractices. So the tenets of negligence and malpractice is that you, the nurse, you have the onus, the accountability to provide. Once you take a patient, you have a special duty to that patient, and you have to provide the best care for that patient. Now, if you breach that care, meaning let's say you walk away and you didn't give the patient medication or give them the wrong medication, and the patient actually suffered harm, and there's a connection between what you did and what the harm that the patient experienced, you are going to be held liable. So in court, the way to prove is that you have a special duty, yes, because you already said this is my patient. Okay, so you make that. And do you breach that duty? Yes, because you did not do what you're supposed to do. And because of what you did the patient suffer harm? Yes, then you're negligent, right? So that's the way to prove it. And sometimes if you have a good lawyer, they will prove that one of those things don't count and you get away. So again, just be aware of it, that, you know, the difference between them. Now, it's the most frequent allegations against nurses, and they usually use the principle of res ipsa loquitur. Res ipsa loquitur is that if not, that it speaks for itself, right? That what you did speaks for itself. So it's part of being aware of everything that you're doing. So for instance, if we go to OR and you leave a foreign object in the patient, well, when I say you, because nurses are, we have more responsibility over than the doctor. And you're counting the instruments, you didn't count, and the doctor said, never mind, just close it, probably in the garbage, and you agree. It speaks for itself that it's negligent. They won't go after the doctor, they're gonna go after you because you should have stopped it. Right? That's the doctrine of rest. It looks, anybody, including non-nurses, will see that it's negligent. That's what it means. The thing speaks for itself. And then you have gross negligence. In gross negligence, it's actually indifference or you nonchalant to your practice. And the court usually punish nurses for this, right? For recklessness. So if you do something that is so stupid, actually I call it stupid, forget about recklessness. The court will do, they will have punitive damages, just not only to accuse you of men, but they will to punish you, to show you that what you did is crazy. So as nurses, again, when I say this, people are like, okay, that's what I'm practicing. No, this pertains to everything you do. Once you become an RN, you have to be careful in every single thing you do, inside and outside work, because it can be used against you as gross negligence. Let's say you're driving and you decided to speed because you have, you're a speeder, and you ended up killing somebody. They will punish you more than they will punish somebody that is not a professional nurse or a professional, for instance, because your training knows about safety, not just patient safety, but everybody's safety. So it's reckless. So you will have, it's called punitive damages. The court will just outrageous. They will say, yeah, we know that the patient is seeking 1 million, but we're giving the patient 100 million, right? Because they want to punish you. Okay, criminal law, it's very, most nurses are not accused of criminal law per se. But with criminal law, it's one of the things that you might find yourself being part of, in the sense of somebody else's malpractice, So again, it's a crime. It's usually you lose your license, lose your job, sometimes you go to jail. So medical malpractice does not usually cover criminal laws, criminal negligence. So again, it's important to watch everything you do. Again, I'm not trying to scare you guys, but it's part of your job responsibility to make sure that you're not doing something that is so deplorable that you will be called as a criminal. And some of them are like, hitting a patient, stealing patients' medication, things like that, stealing from patients, killing a patient, fighting a patient, things like that. But there are defenses against it. You can defend criminal negligence, right? You can use if you have a good lawyer, they can say that it's not you, somebody else, that you're just following orders. Again, that's kind of stupid, because as nurses you're trained. If somebody asks you to jump, would you jump over the Brooklyn Bridge, kind of thing? But we're trained to say to the doctor, I don't agree, I'm going to the next doctor, kind of thing. But you can also say it's an emergency. So in case of emergency situation, you can actually use that as a defense, that look, it was an emergency, and that's why I broke the patient's rib. I wasn't really beating them up. I was doing an emergency. Or it could be an immunity, governmental immunity, like the nurses that work like VA and government entities. Sometimes we get that immunity that they let go because they are under the federal government. Or you can be a Good Samaritan immunity, where your liability, that you're being a good Samaritan, and that shields you from whatever is considered criminal. So let's say there was an accident and you stopped to take care of a patient, and in the process of taking the patient, you broke their rib. The Good Samaritan law can actually protect you in that aspect. So your lawyer may argue for that. And sometimes limitations of malpractice cases. So maybe over some years, depending on the state, they may let you go because the statute of limitation has passed. So importance of disclosing errors. One of the things you have to learn is, yes, errors happen, but pride yourself on being transparent. Tell the truth, even if it hurts you. Don't do weird things like a doctor asks you to steal. Don't steal for doctors or for anybody for that matter. Save your money, buy things, don't steal for patients. If somebody makes you so angry, don't fight them, walk away. Even if they spit on you, actually, if they push you down, lay on the floor and collect, workman's comp. Don't fight anybody because they look for ways to get nurses. And because of that, you need to have your malpractice insurance. If anybody ever asks you, that you don't need malpractice insurance, tell them that you have a crazy professor that said that you do. The hospital, in case of malpractice, the hospital covers themselves, they don't cover you. Malpractice insurance, what it does, it gives you money. It protects your assets. So it protects your house, it protects all the things you've ever worked for because the money is coming from insurance. And it's not that expensive. As a nurse, it costs you less than $100. Now, if you have higher degrees or whatever, it may cost more, right? Depending on what you do. Like I have insurance teaching, I have insurance practicing, I have insurance, for everything that I do. Not because I'm scared I'll make it, but I want to protect when it comes that you lose everything that you ever work for, including your license. Okay, so while assisting in the labor room, a nurse is helping to stimulate a newborn infant who has a low ABGA score. The nurse stumbles, allowing the baby to fall to the floor, resulting in the infant's death. Yikes. This situation is referred as what? Okay, it's a sentinel event, right? The rest doesn't, it's not like the nurse did it on purpose. She stumbled. It's not a rest. It's a locator. It doesn't speak for itself because somebody looking in can say, well, she didn't throw that baby to the floor. She, it was an accident. A negligent act, not really, because she didn't, yes, she owes a duty to that baby, but she didn't breach it. It was an accident. So it's sentinel event, right? It caused death. So whatever you see sentinel event, because just something happened. In this case, she stumbled, she fell. So they're going to now go and look, see why did she stumble? Was it the floor? Was it what she's wearing? Was, all those things. So, so the answer to this is 2. Okay, so we talked already about some of the defenses that you might use when with criminal law, in criminal negligence. Okay, so yeah, I talked about statute of limitation. Okay, making sure that you're transparent and that you disclose every error is actually what hospitals are doing now. They found out that if you're transparent, disclose your error, chances are the patients won't think that you're hiding anything, so less lawsuit. I talked about malpractice insurance. You need it, you need it. Okay. Personal liability. The nurse, because you assume responsibility for the patient not to cause them harm and other negligent act, you cannot be relieved of liability by another professional. So you can't say it's the nurse or the nurse manager, and that's why you see nurses fighting for staffing, good staffing, good, because whatever you do, you can't say it's somebody else that causes it. So again, your damages can be levied against you and they will come after your assets and future earnings. So let's say the the court awarded 250 million. They're going to take everything you have. Of course, if you have 250 million, you shouldn't be a nurse, right? You should be in Aruba somewhere. So they will take everything you have, but then they will force you to work until you pay that 250. So do you work, how much do you live on? Because whatever you make goes into that 250 million. So that's why your malpractice insurance is very important. So some of the liability that is out there comes with personal liability, with floating. We talked about this when we did delegation class. Be careful where you float, and when you float, announce that you have no clue what you're doing so that somebody can help you and document it. Your personal liability will be a team leader or a manager. So leadership, if you ever go into leadership, make sure you have malpractice insurance. Delegating to other team members, they can turn around and say, if not for you, right? So then they will drag you into the liability. There's something called vicarious liability. The employer, as long as you work for an employer, if something happened, they can hold the employer liable, but they can drag you into it because you work for the employer. Again, or corporate liability. So be aware that some things that happen, you now have to share the liability with your hospital. So let's say a patient died and it was your patient, the hospital is still going to be sued. But then when the $250 million is awarded, they will pay 125 and you pay 125. So again, it's making sure that you cover yourself because hospitals are there to cover themselves. Okay. So there are other liabilities out there like risk management. In hospitals, they have risk management departments, and risk management departments are very powerful. Their job is to make sure that you're keeping documentation, you're being protected from any liability. So if any incident happened, they will ask you to do like incident reports or variance reports. And that helps, especially, and of course, when you're doing that, incident report, don't write it in your chat that you're doing incident report, right? Don't take any copy home, don't do it because lawyers they have a way of finding things. So if you have an incident, report it, document it, let risk management know. Usually when you're on orientation, they will teach you how to do this. Never put in your notes that you did it, and don't take copies home, don't take a picture of it because the lawyers will find it. And then the doctors, make sure that the doctor knows because they need to order something to cover, like let's say you get wrong medication, maybe the patient needs to be gavaged, things like that. And then report anything that is unusual that you think might end up being found so that you're not, they won't say that you're hiding anything. Okay. Intentional tort in nursing, again, this is direct violation of a patient's legal right. The patient doesn't have to prove that the nurse breached any special duty. Remember, in negligence, you have to show that you have special duty. Plaintiff doesn't need to say that you owe them anything, just the fact that you violated their legal rights. So usually this is not as serious. They may fine you, or if they have a good lawyer, they may actually charge you of criminal negligence. So in this case, you need a lawyer, right? Because they need to defend your practice. So you can be assault and battery, and assault and battery could be like a patient is falling and you run to help hold them and accidentally leave marks on their skin. They can sue you for assault and battery. So assault, battery, defamation of character. If you're libel and slander, especially if you're on Facebook talking about patients, be careful. False imprisonment can be part of restraint. So if you're restraining somebody, they can say that you're imprisoning them. Invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress. So with assault and battery, it's more of that physical contact, right? You have to be, and that's why when a patient comes into the hospital, we give them consent. They have to sign consent. The consent is actually to provide us that we can touch them, right? We can do all sorts of things on them, or else they can charge us for battery, like we touched them when they didn't give us permission, right? Or assault. So be careful. When it comes to defamation of character, is it written or is it, inferred? So like, for instance, slander is that you injured the person's reputation by speaking about them. So for instance, you get a patient and then you went into the cafeteria and tell your girlfriend about the patient and that they smell and things like that. You're actually slandering them, right? Because you're speaking it. Now, if you put it in writing, that's libel, right? Because you're reading, like, let's say you put it on email to your girlfriend and say, hey, I have this patient that smells. That's libel because it's written. So again, be careful. There are things that go into the medical records and there are things that don't. And actually, there are things you can put in there that still say what you have to say, but in a professional way. False imprisonment, like I mentioned, could be keeping a patient from leaving either by threats or the patient perceives it as threat, or you restrain them. Restrain doesn't mean tie them down per se. It can also be that you close the door and don't let them out, or you put the side rails up and don't let them out. Or you can say, for instance, to an African American, if you leave, I'll call the police. That's a false imprisonment because, first of all, they're scared of police, and now you're putting them, so they can argue that you're forcibly imprisoning them by threats of using the police because of their skin color. So you have to be careful about that. Intentional fleet of emotional distress, you have to be careful what you say to patients. So let's say a patient said, I'm not taking medication, and you say, well, if you don't take medication, I'm going to tie you down. That's a threat, right? So they can sue you for infliction of emotional distress. And or invasion of privacy. Invasion of privacy is, apart from HIPAA, there are other ways you can invade somebody's privacy. So again, importance of making sure that you protect patients' information so that none of their information leaks. But that goes with documentation, how you who you talk to them about. I saw a nurse documenting in the train. That's a no, because people can read it. People standing over the patient, nurse can read what's going on. It could be their family member and stuff like that. So be careful when it comes to all these intentional thoughts. The nurse and the criminal law. The nurse, a crime, nurses are not allowed to commit crime. Just put it that way. And I mean no crime, right? Because just that the state board can take your license. But of course, if you can be imprisoned and you can put to death, that can actually kill you, especially if you kill somebody. So you have to be careful. You can practice illegally. You can be a nurse and claim to be a doctor. You can not report abuse. If you see somebody that is being abused, you're going to report it. Even if it's not true, you still have to, if they find out that it's not true, they're not going to come after you because you have all these defenses that can protect you. You cannot falsify patient records. You cannot assault and batter patients or have sex with patients or do all sorts of things to patients. They're patients. They're vulnerable. You cannot do that. And one of the things that is going on now is trafficking. You have to be aware of those patients that are trafficked because they can say, the nurse should have found out and didn't. So they will call you, and again, that's a criminal offense. Don't be a drug mule. Don't be angel of death. Don't commit fraud, especially Medicaid, Medicare. They will never be able to work anywhere else because Medicare is everywhere. Don't steal, don't rape, don't murder, don't do, anything that, just go home and think about it first. And then if you still want to do it, call me and I'll tell you don't do it. It's not worth it. Seriously, your license, you work too hard for all that, right? And I would rather be poor than be in jail. That's number one. Because first of all, infection control, there's things and it smells and you will never work again as a nurse. Okay, well, so patient rights are also very important. These rights, we must abide by it. Patients can accuse you of keeping their rights from them. So patients have rights to advance directives. They have a right to decide, what happens to them, when they're sick, when they have a right to walk away too. They have a right to informed consent, meaning if you're going to do anything to them, you have to tell them everything that's supposed to happen to them and the benefits, the risks, and in the language they understand. So you can say, well, I told you, but you speak Russian, but I'm telling you in Spanish, that's not an order. Or they don't hear and you're speaking to them and they're deaf, dumb, that's not an informed consent. Okay, part of advanced directives, be aware that you have, the advanced directives that gives you your end of life issue, the care that you want at the end of life. And then you have the living will that kind of designates another individual to make decisions when you're no longer able to make decisions. So again, in hospitals, these are offered to patients when they come in. Some of them take it, some of them don't, but at least it will be in writing that it was offered. They have a right to refuse treatment. You cannot force a patient to take treatment because then that's against their rights and you're actually committing a tort against them. They have a right to leave. So if they're taking care and all of a sudden they say, I don't need this, I'm leaving, you can give them information, what you entail, you will die if you leave, blah, 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 they will still leave. They have to sign an information that it's okay that they receive the information and they still leave. Sometimes they don't want to even sign it, but it still goes into the documentation that it was given, they refused, because at the end of the day, they can come back and sue you for negligence. And physical restraints, again, this is not just for adults, for children, to everybody. You cannot restrain somebody without an order. Of course, if there's an emergency, nurses can initiate it, but they need to immediately get doctor's order. And it cannot be persistent 100% restraint in the sense that they're unrestrained forever. The restraint has to be removed and neurovascular check done, skincare done, and then put back. So it can be continuously. And every 24 hours, the team has to review if this restraint is needed. So there is a lot of things that affect our duty of care as nurses. But one of the things I want to empower you that as long as you know these things, you are good. Nobody can sue you. Get your malpractice insurance, know your standard of practice. Always something, if something doesn't feel right, it usually is not, right? And one of the things that help me in nursing is whenever I have a question about something feels weird, I call my mentor immediately, and usually the mentors will say, what? Don't do it, walk away, call this person, call that. Okay, I will see you guys in class.